Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
My guest on this episode is Dr. Ivan Misner, the founder and chief visionary officer of BNI, the world's largest business networking organization. Founded in 1985, BNI now has over 8,800 chapters throughout every populated continent of the world. Called the father of modern networking by CNN and one of the top networking experts by Forbes, Ivan is considered to be one of the world's leading experts on business networking and has been a keynote speaker for major corporations and associations throughout the world. Ivan is a New York Times bestselling author who has written 24 books, including his latest, Who's in Your Room? Among his many awards, Ivan has been named Humanitarian of the Year by the Red Cross and was recently the recipient of the John C. Maxwell Leadership Award. He is also proud to be the co-founder of the BNI Charitable Foundation. Ivan and his wife Elizabeth are now empty nesters with 3 adult children. Oh, and in his spare time, he is an amateur magician and a black belt in karate. Ivan, it's great to have you with us.
It's great to talk to you again.
I know that you travel quite a bit speaking at events around the world. Are you traveling now or are you spending some time at home?
Well, I'm home this week. I leave next week for France and Italy, where I'm speaking for BNI in both of those locations. And then I head to Brazil, and then India and Poland.
Wow.
That's my some of my trips. I have several in the U.S. this year.
That's amazing. You get your frequent flyer miles in, I'm sure.
Oh, I have 2.1 million miles on one airline, and I have over 1 million miles on 2 different airlines. So I've got 4 million miles on 3 airlines.
Absolutely amazing. If I ask most people what comes to mind when they hear your name, they'd say things like entrepreneur, accomplished business person, and of course, master networker. The first words that come to my mind are captivating, charismatic storyteller. I've had the opportunity to see you speak on many occasions, but I got to ask you this. When you started BNI back in the mid-'80s, did you have much public speaking experience at all? And if you did, could you ever have imagined that it would play such a role in your business life this far out in the future?
Well, that's a great question. And your crystal ball is as good as my crystal ball. But I can't say I'm shocked because I did have some speech training, and I appreciate your kind words. I certainly don't mind, having the reputation of being a raconteur, so, a storyteller. I did have training in high school. I happened to, as a freshman in high school, as a fluke, go to a speech class that I just loved. And I ended up doing 3.5 years of speech class, just because the teacher was amazing. Mr. Tavner was his name. And I did a little bit in college, a year of speech course. I loved presenting. I loved doing presentations. So did I think that it would become a major part of my job? I didn't know, but it doesn't shock me because I love doing it.
Yeah, that's different from most of us. Most of us tried to avoid all that speaking, especially in high school and college. So I give you a lot of credit. I know I did. I did everything I could do to avoid those classes.
I think I'm maybe just slightly. I never really had aspirations to do this, but maybe slightly a borderline stand-up comic. I mean, I love telling stories and making people laugh. I never had any desire to do stand-up comedy, but getting people to laugh from the stage just makes you feel good.
Yeah, it does, and you have a line actually about speaking and telling stories that I just love. And let me make sure I have this right. A story is a fact wrapped in emotion. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a fact wrapped in an emotion that compels people to take action that transforms them in some way. 4 steps. It's a fact that's wrapped in an emotion that compels people to take action It transforms them in some way. And, that's not mine. I heard that years ago. I've altered it slightly, but it's an old concept that I think it holds up today. A fact wrapped in an emotion is basically a joke. It's just, it's a story. There's no point to it.
Sure, an anecdote.
Yeah, it's an anecdote, and I'm not particularly keen on telling anecdotes. I want to tell stories that change people's lives, and in order to change people's lives, you have to compel them to take action. So that story has to have somebody go, I need to do that, or I need to change something about myself, and that change or that doing transforms them. And when you can transform someone through a story, you are a master storyteller.
And that does not come easy. I think a lot of people think they can just get up and speak on stage and they'll have an effect like this in someone's life. But this is well planned and well thought out, yes?
Oh, yeah. Listen, my presentations, I plan my spontaneity. My talks are well choreographed. They're timed, they're practiced, including, things that are supposed to look off the cuff and feel off the cuff. They're planned and practiced. And listen, that doesn't mean that I don't do some things off the cuff occasionally. And if they go over well, then they get incorporated into my presentation next time. But you learn what works when you're talking to an audience, which means a couple of things. First, you have to practice. And then you have to adjust. So as you are practicing your presentation, sometimes it's in front of people, but not a full audience. For example, my poor wife probably hears every talk before I ever give it. She usually hears it in pieces over time. And then I give the presentation, but the first time I do it it's not a whole lot like the 10th time I do it. There generally will be a lot of changes by the time I do it the 10th time, because I learn what works and doesn't work, and I adjust. You got to adjust your talk. And by the way, this is really important. To do a 1-hour keynote, before I ever get up and do that 1-hour keynote, I spend at least 40 hours, 40,
wow,
preparing my talk.
I think that's a point that a lot of people miss, is how much preparation goes in.
Yeah, you got to prepare. And there's a lot of things that you got to prepare. You got to prepare your talks, your stories. You got to prepare your information, your content. I also believe in preparing my PowerPoints. And I use PowerPoints, and I know there are people who don't like PowerPoints and that use them really badly. Here's how I use a PowerPoint. Each PowerPoint slide for me is a character in my presentation. It's not verbiage. As a matter of fact, if you see my PowerPoints, you see very few words. Sometimes slides have no words. They're just an image. My PowerPoint slides, each slide is a character in my presentation. Sometimes I'm leading up to a point, and then I show the next slide, and there's no words, and just the photo makes people laugh because I've laid up the topic. And then I just show the picture, and people laugh like crazy. And so my PowerPoints are I'll give you an example. I talk about one of my presentations is called Networking Up. And I talk about the fact that I've gotten pretty good at networking up. And the reason that I've gotten pretty good, by networking up, I mean, you're networking above your weight class. You're networking with people who are more successful than you. And I talk about the fact that I've gotten pretty good at it because I screwed up a lot. I mean, I made one mistake after another trying to network up. And it has a plastic chair, the back of a plastic chair over their head. They obviously shoved their head through this chair, and they just look like a doofus. And I just show this picture. I don't need to say anything. All I say before I show the photo is sometimes I messed up real bad, and then I show this picture, and everybody laughs. And it makes me to the audience. It makes me feel real. It makes me feel honest, and it gives them a good laugh. So my PowerPoints are a character in my presentation. And if you use PowerPoints that way, you're using them effectively. If you use it with a ton of content, you're doing a training, not a keynote.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people use that incorrectly. So to your point of using it as a support to foster what you're saying is really a craft. And so many people use it poorly. And you're right, turn it into a training or, unfortunately, they just destroy their own presentation.
They do. There's a book that I recommend. It's been out for many years. It's called Presentation Zen, Z-E-N, Presentation Zen. And I recommend that book because it's a thin book. It's not very big. It's color. It gives examples of how to do PowerPoints that are content-based, not that are graphically based, not verbiage-based. And I recommend that.
Presentation Zen. I'll have to take a look at that. I've read where PowerPoint, you think of it like a flashcard or a billboard that you're going by at 65 miles an hour. It's got to get to the point so people can get back to you because you're the presentation, not the slides.
I would agree with that. And it's your content, your material is what drives the presentation. And that's why I say the PowerPoint's just a character in it, in the sense that it supports what you're saying. And the more people have to read, the harder it is for them to follow what you're saying. And that's why I tend to have very little verbiage in my PowerPoints.
Well, and that's why I think so much of your presentations. They're just captivating.
Thank you.
One of the things you said once that surprised me is that you're introverted. And a lot of people would think that someone who speaks as much as you do, who is involved in networking, that you just wouldn't be introverted. How do you reconcile those two things?
Well, first of all, I'd have to say I didn't really recognize that for a long time. It was probably about 10 years ago that I was at home and with my wife, and our kids were at some school theater program, a rehearsrsal. And so we didn't have to be there. And it was just my wife and I, and we had very little time, just us for an evening. And we're having dinner, very nice. It was fun and relaxing. And I was talking to her, and I don't even remember what we were talking about, but I said to her, well, you know me, honey, I'm such an extrovert. And she looked at me and she said, no, you're not. And I said, what do you mean I'm not? Of course I'm an extrovert. I'm a keynote speaker. Oh, okay. All right, honey, that's what you think. That's fine. I'm like, no, what do you mean if that's what I think? I run the world's largest networking organization. I am not an introvert. Okay, sweetie, if that's what you think. It's like, dude, stop that. I'm a speaker. I run a network. I am not an introvert. And so she said, well, I just started reading this book called The Introvert and Extrovert in Love. And she said, here are some of the things that I have read about what an introvert is. And she starts naming off this stuff that's an introvert. I'm like, yeah, that's a little like me. Okay, that's a little like me. And then she just nailed me. She said, introverts recharge their batteries by being alone. They don't, going out and being with people does not recharge their batteries. It takes energy away from them. And so they have to come home and be alone or be with just family. They don't want to be around people. And I was like, okay, all right, that's totally me, but I am not an introvert. And so now I'm annoyed. And I go into my office and I get on the internet and I find a test that I could take because I'm going to show her I am not an introvert. And I take this test and it pops up and it says, congratulations, Ivan Misner. You are an introvert who is a situational extrovert.
Ah.
And it said, so now go apologize to your wife. I didn't say that. But, so a situational extrovert is somebody who, under certain situations, comes across as an introvert, as an extrovert. And those situations are when they're talking about their area of expertise, when they're doing something that they're passionate about. They come across as an extrovert. Otherwise, generally speaking, they come across as an introvert. And that made a lot of sense for me, starting with the organization I created. I mean, think about B&I. B&I allows one person per profession, small group, get together every week. It's about building relationships. I could have started a network that was about parties, big mixers, tons of people, but I felt uncomfortable in those situations. And I never really added two and two together. B&I in and of itself is really aimed at people who want to go deep and build relationships. And that's not necessarily an extrovert. And it hit me why I was, in fact, a situational extrovert, basically an introvert.
Makes perfect sense.
My wife, of course, was again right.
Isn't that amazing how that happens?
Yes, it is.
Are you ready to work directly with Peter and develop your public speaking skills? Then schedule your free call with Peter at petergeorgepublicspeaking.com/call. Again, that's petergeorgepublicspeaking.com/call for your personal coaching and support. Now back to Peter and his guest.
When it comes to speaking in front of others, and what's that one piece of advice you would give either an aspiring speaker or someone who's even speaking out in the world now? What would you offer to them?
I think one of the most important pieces of advice is something I've given to people a lot, and they generally say they've never heard this, and that is to relive a story, don't retell a story. Don't just retell it, relive it. So when you're on stage and you're telling this story, I want you to visualize where you are. Visualize the people you're talking about. Try to create that image in other people's minds and do it in a creative, interesting way. For example, I tell one story, I call it the football story, about my early days as a young man in high school and I was playing football. And we had an opportunity to see the Rams practice, the LA Rams. And, you know, I try to tell this story, but how do you explain how big these men are? You know, they're huge.
Yes, they are.
When you see them in full pads, these men are giants. And so, you know, you do a little hyperbole. You talk a little bit about the way you felt. So when I saw these men and they walked past me, and these were the greats, Merlin Olsen, Rosie Greer, Jack Youngblood, they were giants. And so I want people to get that sense of how I felt. And so I exaggerate a little, you know. I say these men, I point to the largest door in the room, and I say, imagine that door frame with a helmet. They had one eye in the middle of their head, hair on their teeth. These were big men. And people laugh, but they get this vision of what I experienced, because I looked at these men and I thought they were medieval giants. They were so big. And so you relive that story. You know, you could say I saw these football players, they were really big and they came by. But that's not the same.
No, not even close.
No, not even close. And so by reliving it, I mean, you talk about how you felt. And so if you can give a description that explains how you felt, then you're reliving the story. And people are there with you. They see these big men. They visualize these big men. And you then become a better storyteller.
Great advice. And that's something we can all use. So don't just tell stories, relive the story.
Yeah, pretend you're there. Pretend you're experiencing it again. Every time I tell a story, I visualize myself in that situation and try to relive it as much as possible. Yeah.
And that transports us right along with you.
It does. It does. And you know what? Some of the best stories are stories that at the moment it happened, when it took place, you were horrified. You were embarrassed. The football story is not a good example of that, but you know, I tell a story about a time where I almost lit a television studio on fire. I did a magic trick, and I almost lit the entire studio on fire with this magic trick. And at the moment, it was like the worst moment in my life. I was so horrified, so embarrassed at what I did.
I would think.
And yet, when people, when you tell people a story like that and you relive it with them, first of all, they look at you and they think, okay, here's a really successful person who did something incredibly stupid. Maybe I'm not so bad. You know what I mean? I've done dumb things, but I've never done anything that dumb. And I think it makes people feel like you're a real person. Even though you're on stage, you're the quote unquote expert. It makes people feel like you're a real person. And so I find that some of my best stories are some of my most embarrassing experiences.
Like you said, here you are the expert, you're the guy up there, and you're one of us, which makes that engagement and that connection. Along with being a talented speaker, you're also a prolific writer. You've authored how many books so far?
Well, I just had the 24th book come out last weekend. It was co-written with my wife. It's her story about healing cancer. But it was my 24 books, but who's counting?
What's your latest one?
My latest book is a book called Who's in Your Room? And I just came out with it a few months ago, and about 5 months ago. I love this book. It's one of my favorite books. It's my first self-help book, self-development book. I wish I had this book when I was 17 years old. I think it would have helped me a lot, and I urge people to check it out. It's a quick read, 2 hours. Let me give you 60 seconds on the concept.
Sure.
Imagine you live your life in one room, and that one room has only one door, and that one door is an enter-only door. So the people who come into your life or into your room are there forever. You could never get them out. Now, luckily, Peter, this is a metaphor, but if it were true, would you be more selective about the people you let into your life?
Oh, definitely.
And that's what virtually everyone says. Then our question is, then why aren't we? Why aren't we more selective? Because I would argue that it's more than a metaphor. I'd like for you to think for a moment, and if you're listening to this podcast, I want you to think with us about somebody who is out of your life. You got them out of your life, but when they were in your life, they were toxic, they were difficult, they were problematic. You did not like being around them, and you got them out of your life. Now, Peter, do you have somebody like that in your mind?
Oh, yeah, I do.
You don't have to share it. I'm not going to make you share it. You got it. Okay. So here's the deal. Okay. And can you remember what they did that made you mad?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So if you're listening to this, I want you to think the same thing. I want you to think about what it was that they did that really frustrated you. So here's the deal. If they're still in your head, they're still in your room because they have impacted you for the rest of your life. You will make decisions based on your experiences with this person, good or bad. They could be good experiences, they could be bad experiences. But you're going to make decisions for the rest of your life because of the experiences that you've had with the people in your life. And so why not be more selective about bringing people into your life that are the kind of people that you want in your life? And that's what the entire book is about. It's about being careful it's about creating your best life by surrounding yourself with people who have values that are resonant with yours.
Boy, that seems like it would make life so much more enjoyable.
I agree. It's an easy read. It's a great book. I think, I've written a lot of books. I honestly think this book will have a bigger impact on people's lives than any book I've done.
That's going to be a great feeling.
And I'm doing a lot of speeches on this talk, so it's a lot of fun. It's a great it's a great topic to talk about.
Where can our listeners get a copy?
You can get it on Amazon. It is available at bookstores, but it's also available at Amazon.com. It hit number one on self-help a few months ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. You know what? People ask me, because I've got, 16, 17 best-selling books. And people ask me, well, what's the secret to getting a best-selling book? I said, making a book a bestseller is easy. What's difficult is having 252,000 clients. That's difficult. You get 252,000 clients, then you can make a book a bestseller. The hard thing is getting the clients. So, we have 252,000 BNI members, so it's reasonably easy to get best-selling books. So anybody that wants to follow my content, I've been writing a blog for 12 years. Go to ivanmisner.com, and of course, BNI is bni.com.
Well, Ivan, it's been a pleasure having you here, and I really appreciate it. I'm sure my listeners do too. I want to wish you on all those travels you have coming up, safe travels, have a great time, and when you get back to home, take some time and relax.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks for this interview. It was good talking to you again.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites, public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.